Hello there and welcome. My name is Carrie Varela, and it's always a wonderful joy to be here with Michaela Daystar and Bronwen Logan, and we are the Reiki Women podcast. Today, we wanted to touch on a topic that's a little tender. It's about navigating the holidays with a broken heart. And so we wanted to kind of bring ourselves together and offer this wealth of wisdom from three Reiki women about how to navigate the holidays when life isn't perfect, or you're in the midst of a tragedy, or dealing with loss, or really deep in the journey of grief. So I'd love to hear from anyone who'd like to start. How do you navigate the holidays with a broken heart?
I mean, not always well, to be perfectly honest, but um, but with increasing capacity, of course, largely due to this practice of the system of Reiki, and I want to, as you were talking, Carrie, it came up in my mind that the techniques for navigating the holidays with a broken heart or working through grief of any kind, it's the same as navigating any time period with that form of grief. But as many of us have experienced, the times when there's kind of a cultural focus and emphasis on tradition and family connection, and these times when we're supposed to be happy and joyful, and we are not because of circumstances, or we are happy and joyful and at the same time we're heartbroken. There can be a lot of pressure from the world around us to conform to that vision of what the holidays are supposed to be, and that isn't true kind of during much of the rest of the time. So it just felt like that's where I wanted to start, just to acknowledge that this can be challenging at any time. And we are feeling a lot of collective pressure to turn away from grief and to really embrace at least the image of joyfulness, even if we don't actually feel it. But that's not really what the holidays are about, right? Like, for me, this time is about giving ourselves the opportunity to slow down and be present with what is, which can be a whole host of things. So anyway, that's just kind of what came up as I thought about this container and just how to step inside of it with you all.
I just got a message in my inbox yesterday, and it was something like, it's "Are you okay?" day or week. Do you have "Are you okay?" And it's like, "Are you okay?" Right?
Oh,
Anyway, so we have this thing here in Australia as a way of checking in on people. And at this time of year, it becomes really a big thing, that you get a lot of messages about that and asking you to check in on your friends and family. And because, as you're just saying, Michaela, often we're told that we should be being cheerful and all these things, which it's lovely, but sometimes it's superficial, and it's underneath that there can be a lot of sadness, and we often don't know what's going on in people's lives. So actually asking someone, "Are you okay?"
mm.
and leaving the space for them to talk, rather than trying to fill it in and chitter chatter. So that is the idea of that, and I think it's a really great concept, and it's something that I think's really taken on and is used by a lot of the services that we have, that help people with depression and anxiety. So they really support that, and the government supports it as well. So are you okay?
Ah, thank you for
I love
asking.
that question.
Yeah.
And I think it's really is important, to authentically check in with our friends. And it's so nice to have that kind of societal push, to encourage people to reach out to people who might feel isolated or alone during this time of year. And it doesn't take any special training, but it does take a willingness to sit with people in pain and in grief and loss, to just really authentically ask that question, "Are you okay?" and just be patient and wait for somebody to answer that. And I know
Even
as
in that tiny gap then, Carrie, there was fear. Did you feel that?
mm-hmm.
We all feel that fear because it's really hard to answer that truthfully.
And vulnerable, vulnerable to really share. And those pauses of reflection, like, what do I really want to share about, my own inner world with somebody else? Sometimes I teach a yoga class, and the whole theme of it is just asking ourselves, like, how am I doing?
Mm.
And like being willing to check in with ourselves as if you were your own best friend who just really wanted to know how you're doing. And so I think it is a beautiful offering to do for ourselves, but definitely think in times where our heart is broken or grieving or have lost something that's really valuable and important to us, that it's important to have a few other people on the line that you can call, feel comfortable to talk with, speak to. I think it's a really good tip.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you're really speaking to the fifth precept, right? That just for today, I'm compassionate to myself and others, right? And so your yoga class, a whole yoga class devoted to just for today, I'm compassionate to myself. I'm listening and paying attention. And then how and when do we turn that, loving self-regard onto others? And, if you think about how do we navigate, times of grief and times of distress, particularly in during the holidays when again we have this kind of cultural expectation of turning towards joyfulness. I think that's really a powerful place to start, right? A foundational place to start, to hold ourselves in compassion for whatever it is that we're experiencing, seeking others, as you just said, who we know to have the capacity to hold that with us. And then when we have the fortitude, right, turning that on and for other folks. And I spend a lot of time kind of working with and thinking about and discussing with other people the idea that so much suffering and distress in the world that we cause from the inside out, so for ourselves and then with other people, projecting onto other people, from just simple, interpersonal suffering and distress to like global suffering and distress, comes directly from our inability to be uncomfortable, to tolerate the discomfort of whatever it is that we're feeling or experiencing. And that when we can't tolerate the discomfort, we can't be with what we are experiencing. So in this case, grief perhaps, or a broken heart, distress, the incipient like messages of joyfulness that are coming at us from all directions when that's not what we feel. When we can't tolerate the discomfort of all of that, we don't have practices that help us to make it feel like we have enough room inside to hold all of that discomfort. What do? We numb ourselves out, or we, turn to anger or distress. Then we turn that onto other people. We cause conflict amongst each other, or we feel that conflict inside of ourselves. And while we don't always have responsibility or control about the things that happen to us and come into our life, that is a place where we do have control, that we can seek out or choose to work with our ability to be with that discomfort. And that goes both ways, right? Because one of the reasons we might not reach out and ask a person with genuine curiosity, how are you doing? And really hold space for an honest answer might be that discomfort of hearing it, right? Of being able to hold space for it. Can I really listen? Is that enough? Right? I'm supposed to fix this problem for them if they're distressed, and I don't know how to do that. That discomfort can be on both sides of that conversation. And so one of the things that's been the most lasting and powerful impacts of the system of Reiki for me, and something I specifically focus on with students, is that it is a practice that increases our capacity to be present with whatever it is we're experiencing, including discomfort, so that discomfort does not turn into suffering. so that we can stay with what we're feeling long enough to allow it to have its full life cycle and to move out and through us. Yeah, so that's a in terms of how we navigate this experience, that's been a huge one. Yeah, I'll just pause there.
Yeah, I had an experience along these lines this week. So I had a practice. I do a practice group with Reiki students at the International House of Reiki, and this week was my second last one. And I've been with the International House of Reiki for 23 years. Everything that you read there, I've written. I've created all the student side. Everything. So it's like, all of a sudden to say that that's going to end, is sort of weird. And I had to say it in the group. And, there is, of course, there's a heartbreak in that. Of course there is. And yet, of course, there's, the other side to that. I am aware that, and I think it's through practicing that, things always change and things don't stay the same. And whatever, to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. And it was lovely in the group because I was feeling quite allergic because we had big winds. And when I first came on, I said, oh, look, I've had really red eyes and I was all itchy and we started the practice and I was just crying in the practice and but I was crying in the practice. I wasn't actually allergic, I don't think, it's just sort of like, and it was a release. And I had written about that on that Facebook thing that you might have seen, and I was just saying how exquisite that feeling is of release of emotion, and especially without fear, and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and being aware that not being scared of being judged and just being yourself and really just allowing that release to happen and knowing that it's okay. We're all just humans and we all have things that happen to us. And sometimes we feel sad, sometimes we feel joy. And that is a part of this wonderful being human. And it really is quite an exquisite feeling, when we can let go into that instead of holding on to it and going, oh, I'm not going to be sad. I can't show that. I can't do this. I can't, so just letting go into that is, I found, I find it to be, I guess, if we move into the precepts, it's really just being in the moment and allowing whatever needs to happen in that moment to happen and know that that's just that moment. Yeah.
I think those are all really beautiful principles. I know for myself, well, so I can say that a few circumstances in my life over the last few years have really broken my heart, and there are long cycles of grief. And I can say, like, there's no real mending when these kinds of tragedies happen. That I just still feel when I feel into these things, like how tragic these particular events were. And I think my shift is trying to move from that place of brokenness to a place of openness. Mending the heart in such a way that we move from broken to open. But speaking back to the precepts, and I think the precepts are an incredible tool to help us access, it can be like a state of emotional center when we're in kind of a flux where we can appreciate and be with all the emotions that we might be feeling, but kind of anchor ourselves into maybe the right, I don't want to say right as in, this is everything else is the wrong way, but a right way of thinking. Because sometimes when we're in emotional distress, we're not necessarily thinking super clearly. But nevertheless, one of the tragedies that has happened to a close friend of mine was her son died very awfully of this vicious brain cancer. And so, and he was diagnosed, and within several months he died. And they were a close friend of mine, and he was like 13 years old when he died, and just there was so much tenderness in that experience. And the family had to navigated a season through the holidays. It was the last season with their son. And I had a dream in the midst of this experience where, like, I mean, my heart was just totally broken for this family. And, to such a way, it's hard to separate, like, is that, it's happening to them, but I felt that pain so deeply too. And, so, in the whole process, one really profound experience is I had a dream, and and it was a dream that's not like, just this kind of weird, my brain cycling dream, but like a deep, profound gift of a dream from the universe. And then when I woke up from it, it shook me like to my core. I had to get up and like I just journal what I had experienced in the dream. Um, but the dream was that I was driving down a road, and it was a blizzard out, and it was just like just so much snow and blackout conditions. You can't see anything, and the headlights from my car were shining into that darkness, and that's what I felt like this family was going through. And in the dream, I felt this message that at the end of that journey is love, and that there was this vision of coming into a cabin, and there was like a fire in the hearth, and this deep, penetrating, compassionate love over. And I think that that's really what compassion is speaking to when we think about the precepts, and really opening our heart through that lens of compassion. And what's there is just this kind of raw, savage, broken love. And I think that when we can be with others who have that kind of pain in their life or navigating, it's we have to speak from that place, have to offer our support and love from that place. And in my experience of working with people, and my capacity as a Reiki practitioner, is that people really listen and can really resonate when they feel that you're coming from this deep place of compassion and love. And and it reminds us of the whole journey of life, right? That somehow, through all of life's tragedies, we have to let go of everything we've ever created, and all of the connections we've ever made in our life. And so there's always that tenderness, I think, and I think we feel that in our journey through life, and that it can make it really hard to be open.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does, because it's that, I mean, you speak of that tenderness, that vulnerability of being open to love, to that level of love, that when we have experienced a loss, that it's overwhelming. And what we know is that if we allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by that, and we close ourselves off to grief, then we're also closing ourselves to love, that they're intertwined, that they coexist, in perfect symmetry to each other. And we need to understand that as part of daily life. And I think that, what you're speaking to is, when you speak about that change is constant, right? That everything is going to change and, become lost in some form, come again in some other form, perhaps. That we need to be a lot more honest with ourselves about that. And we need to live our lives with so much more, like, presence to that. And ideally, in times when we're feeling okay and we're feeling connected and we're feeling like that love is present, so that we can really build our capacity to be with it, so we're not blindsided by the loss so much. And that requires really making space in our life for it. Regularly, right? Not just when we're in a state of bereavement, or we're in a state of coming face to face with loss. I've been, working with two different groups. One of my oldest friends, kind of as a friend group, and then a group of Reiki colleagues, to explicitly make regular space for grief practice. Monthly, quarterly, we've changed up the timing from, depending on schedules, but to put in our calendar, right, regardless of what else is going on in life, space to come together and be with grief in whatever form that shows up. And my best friend and I just had our quarterly kind of grief connection, and that the group of people we usually do it with, none of them were able to attend, so it was just me and her. And I kind of stepped into it with this, like, well, I don't have anything I'm actively grieving at this time, so we'll just, be with the concept. We'll make space for whatever's there. But what's true is that there's always something, that has been lost, right? We see it in the world around us, right? There's grief in the world, and we're so connected, right? Reiki practice is so much about remembering our connection. And part of what can feel scary about that, and sometimes I have students express this, part of what can feel challenging about a practice that brings us into interconnection is that we feel those layers of grief as well as love out in the world. So there's always something to touch into if we make space for grief. And what we've noticed is that there's often this resistance. We have it in the calendar, we know we're going to do it, we know it's beneficial. Somebody or all of us will have some resistance to it. And it might show up as just, I don't have time for that. Or this doesn't feel important right now. I don't have anything I'm grieving. Or I'm so in grief that I can't even deal with doing this right now. Some version of something like that. And it always turns out to be necessary and perfect, because it's something that we don't give ourselves and each other as a culture. And so we think about, techniques and ways to navigate the holidays with a broken heart, making intentional, regular space and time in your life to make space for grief, however that shows up on a given day, which might just mean sitting with somebody else who's experiencing it, or whatever it looks like. We could have a whole other show about what that looks like, right? The group that I've been working with other Reiki colleagues has been a lot about kind of creating structures for how to be in grief ritual from a Reiki perspective. But it doesn't matter what you do so much as that you do it, and that you come, either by yourself as a personal ritual, but ideally at least some of the time with others, to again create that intentional space for grief to be present. For you to give it some attention, for you to give yourself compassion and each other compassion inside of it, to tend it as a regular part of life, which it is. And I've been doing that now for over a year, and it's noticeable this holiday season as I'm working through my own griefs, how much more calm and kind of fortified I feel, how much less I'm impacted by the messaging that tells me I should just be happy, and how much more willing I am to just be however I am on a given day. And what I've noticed as well is that as I have more ease in the challenging grieving feelings, there's also more ease in the joyful feelings, right? Because if I'm feeling like I have to resist the one, then I end up resisting both of them and going into more of a numbed out space, more of a let me just get through it space. I don't want to feel any of it space. And so it's been an interesting paradox to observe in my life that as I make more space for grief, that naturally there's more space for joy and for love, that they get to coexist with a little bit more consistency and strength. And so, yeah, I think the example that you share, Carrie, so heartfully is so beautiful. And the fact that your dream opened up a space for a grief ritual, for yourself, is something for us to pay attention to as absolutely possible, and a space where, our dream space is a place where we're working through these things. And so all of those are ways that we can create this space for ourselves and each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about it. I agree. One thing I can say is that I too have noticed I think I've said that before, but when I was younger, I think when I was like in my early 20s, and that, I felt quite unsettled in life, and I came from a difficult family background, and so just not really having any hooks in life, and nothing to be able to guide me, I guess. And the idea that, for example, at Christmas, that I might be alone, or that I mightn't, there might not be a family member or a friend to share that with, would have been, I would not have been able to comprehend that, and that would have been totally, totally heartbreaking. And yet I know a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago or something like that, I went through Christmas and there was no one here. And it was okay. I didn't really think about it. I didn't make a story out of it. I didn't, it was another day, and it was just the way that things turned out, and it was okay. There was no grief or sadness in that sense, because I didn't need to make something of that, I guess. And I can, such a big difference in my life, and I know that it is because of just understanding that sometimes things are the way that they are, and it's okay, rather than having to try to, you've both said that, but adhere to other to standards that are set by some society. I always laugh, at American movies, and I'm sure it's Australian, but we're slightly different here because it's summer. But the American movies of everyone in these beautiful houses with 100 people at Christmas, and they're all having drinks, and there's beautiful lights, and everyone's dressed up, and I think, God, is that really Christmas? I've never had a Christmas like that. But and I think that when we see those sorts of standards in movies or whatever, that it's very, very difficult for people often to think, oh, I'm not living that. That's not me. That's not my existence. Does that mean that I'm, not successful, or, whatever that is that they might feel? Difficult.
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting. Sorry to jump in there.
No, go ahead. I'm chuckling at the image of the cheesy American Christmas movie. Go, Carrie.
Does it really happen? Tell me. Do they exist? Are they real people?
I agree. And I think that there's so much romanticization, if that's a word, romanticization of the holidays. And what you're speaking to is it's really about expectation, right? And we have these expectations for self, like, oh, I should, and sometimes we don't even realize how unreasonable they are. Like, I will never have a Christmas alone, or like, I never want to be single on Christmas, or I never there's so many different things. I mean, I remember one year my husband and I were just fighting bitterly at Christmas, and it was just like a terrible Christmas, and the whole time we were just like locked up in this emotional deadlock, and it was really painful. But some of it is because I had some expectations of, like, he's Jewish and I came from a Christian household, and so we have like these different mindsets that we take into this time of year, and different sets of expectations. And so I think that speaks to one of the practices that I really like to do is, when I'm noticing that there's something there that is missing, and this time of year really highlights that for me in a really big way. One of the tools that I use is a mantra meditation with a mala, and so you repeat a mantra. Could be 108 recitations, 88 recitations is also appropriate, especially within Japanese traditions. And the idea is, focusing your mind to that mantra, the positivity of that mantra. Almost all mantras will have some sort of, beautiful message for us. But by doing that, you I think you start to look holistically. It's like you're looking through 108 different lenses of that issue, and give yourself that time to really sit with it and kind of brew some magic over what it is that you're missing in life, and hopefully help release some of those expectations just so you can be more in the moment and be more receptive to what is. I think is one powerful tool, but it also can help, create a field of positivity around you, a sense of protection. And I think that's another thing that sometimes the holidays can really bring up is our triggers with our family, especially our friends.
For
Again,
sure.
his expectations of things not working in our life. So, after a mala mantra recitation, I might sit and journal for a little while and just think about those kind of common triggers, those common frustrations that can arise when I'm like around family or in a big group of people, or, have kind of this big old sack of grief that I'm carrying around with me. Um, and so, and by doing that, at least bring some more awareness around the triggers, because I think one of the worst things we can do is go into a situation where you're going to get triggered, and it's just like that trigger just happens and like a bullet, explodes. Your anger also explodes, and there's just, no fuse, like a fuse on a bomb. Like you want to be able to have like a long fuse so you can like put out the bomb well before it explodes. I think those are all really wonderful tools that I've used at different times.
Yeah, you're really speaking to me to the importance of creating mindful ritual around things like this. Bron, when you were speaking, this came up to me, and then it just came even more clearly, Carrie, as you were speaking. But around Thanksgiving time, I got a message from these amazing musicians that I follow. You all should also be following them, Sean and Abigail Bengson, uh, most well known of the Keep Going On song that they released during COVID, which is magical. But there, I really consider them people who work with spirituality and spirit and magic through song and through music. And this particular video that she released was around navigating the difficulties that we as Americans can have around Thanksgiving with relation to reconciling the actual history of Thanksgiving in terms of the history of Native American genocide, and how we can feel trapped inside of traditions that we love, right? Many of us love the traditions of Thanksgiving around family and coming together around gratitude and feasting and, those sorts of things. But then feeling like there's something else, there's some different response that's needed to be in integrity with that season, and feeling trapped inside of that. How can I be inside of these traditions, but also make room for this other reality? And she talked about the difference between tradition and ritual. And what she meant by that, and I think that the words tradition and ritual can be used in a more flexible way than this, but just to kind of keep it simple and like break down this distinction, the idea that traditions can be very rigid. There can be you are supposed to feel like this and act like this and do these things on Christmas, right? And that means a big house with lots of lights and 100 people and the music going and everybody's cheerful and blah, blah, blah. We've seen it in a Hallmark movie, right? That tells us how we're supposed to be. But then also, like my reality is this Christmas is the 2-year anniversary of my relationship ending. I was in an 8-year relationship that ended just before Christmas in 2020. Possibly the most messed up time for that to have happened, like Christmas time 2020 in the middle of COVID quarantine. And so last year's Christmas was very it was very much that what you were just describing, Bronwen, of feeling like, holy shit, I'm going to be alone on Christmas, and like I having accepted the situation like a year out, like just that kind of just despair of like not of still feeling stuck inside of the traditions that held a rigid view in my mind that meant oh, you cuddle up with your sweetheart with candles and you do presents, after the kids are in bed, and you have this kind of experience on Christmas Eve. Like, that's correct tradition. And I hadn't created a new ritual for myself. And so from Abigail's perspective, when we find ourselves feeling rigid inside of a tradition, that tradition no longer feels nourishing and supportive, and, like we don't fit inside of it anymore, or right now for whatever reason, then we turn to ritual, where we can tune in with all of our senses to what is needed in this moment, just for today. What does it mean to be in this holiday, this moment, with these feelings, with compassion for myself, with gratitude, unattached to my fear and my anger, diligent in all of this? What is needed right now? Can I give myself some piece of that? How can I respond to how that makes me feel? And for me, a ritual opens up a space where we can put some structure around it, but we can follow the breadcrumbs of what the moment is asking for. We can use our intuition, we can use all of our creativity and our imagination to really respond to the moment, and possibly create new traditions out of that, or have an experience that's just for that moment. But that's responding to that moment and making space for everything that is in that moment. And so, even before we talked about having this conversation, I was aware that, I really need to be mindful of that this year, that I need to create a Christmas tradition, away from the traditions I have with my kids, that is about love and compassion and nourishment and coziness and warm feelings for and with myself, right? That, like, if I am relying on there being some other person with me, or I can't have those good feelings, then I'm in trouble, right? But if I can create a ritual for myself that's repeatable, that allows me to access those feelings, whether or not there's a person, then when or if there is a person with that ritual with me sometime in the future, I'm not putting all the pressure on them to make me feel a certain way. You know what I mean? Because if it's like, I can only feel happy and cozy and safe and loved on Christmas if this other person is giving me that, that's a lot to put on that other person.
Yeah.
And so, so creating intentional ritual around what we need in the moment, responding to it without putting restrictions on it that come from outside of ourselves, feels really alive in what both of you were just sharing.
Yeah. It made me think of a few things. One being, you talked about expectations, and, so it makes us inflexible. And I remember one Christmas, I don't know, maybe it was 10 years ago, and I had to take my mum to the hospital because she had a stomach bleed on Christmas Day. And the reason is she was so nervous about getting everything right and having it so perfect for everybody, and she'd start out months ahead with, like, what are we doing for Christmas? That total inflexible, and having an expectation that that day is going to be perfect. And it actually backfired incredibly by being totally imperfect, by us all sitting in a hospital, and my poor mum, trying to do the best I know, and we just get caught up in this sort of thing, don't we? And so, definitely someone who wasn't looking after herself at that point, right? And doing that giving to everybody else, which is something that mothers sometimes do, including ourselves, right? So, keeping that in mind. But if I think of myself, I love all those thoughts, both of you, whatever it is, Carrie, that what you do, I think that's so beautiful. And I know when I actually was alone at Christmas, oh, now I'm starting to make a story out of it, aren't I? But anyway, when I was alone at Christmas, it really wasn't a big thing. And I did actually enjoy having, for this very short period of time, a bit of time where I didn't have to be something for someone or something. And I knew no one was, I wasn't going to be bothered as such. And I could really, sit back, read a book with a cup of tea, be in nature, just enjoy the moment for what it was. And which is something that I think, I personally find quite difficult to do. I'm an active person and have lots of different things that I'm busy with. So just really actually being able to let go, we can make these things a blessing at the same time. you know. Yeah.
I agree.
Absolutely. And I think like the Reiki ideals or Reiki principles around non-duality are just so incredibly useful, and whether you're going through a good time or a rough time around the holidays, even sometimes for me, like I feel really good in my life. I feel very balanced. I feel very complete in my family, and in many ways just have so many incredible blessings. But I still feel this emotional vulnerability for others who don't have that, or I feel the pain in the world. Um, and so I also think it's helpful if you feel that kind of non-duality. It's like I can't be completely happy when my other friend I know, or there's a war in Ukraine, or all of these things that might be happening in the world that kind of yeah, get to our heart. It's helpful to take time when we're feeling that inner conflict to just send out some prayers for the world and send out some Reiki and positivity, and knowing that when we do that, that is compassion, ignited inside of us, and that we can spread that energy out. And I know when I feel really conflicted, like I have so much abundance and so much wonderful things in my life, but yet feeling like all the pain and sorrow that might be in another person's life or in the world. It's like when I do really do a meta practice of sending out compassion to myself, to others, to people I don't like, to the whole world. That like is like the balm that soothes that feeling for me so much. It really helps me feel like, oh gosh, at least I can send prayers. At least I can send some positivity towards others. And so it's always something I try to be mindful of around this time of year.
Yeah, and I think when you are feeling that lovely sense of balance and and experiencing all those things inside of you and allowing yourself to experience those things without fear or anxiety. Sorry, my cat is knocking my computer. Stop that. Scratching himself on the computer. Then that balance that you put out there is something that affects everybody that you meet and see and think about. So the more that you have that beautiful openness and completeness, wholeness, then that is going to be just such a beautiful gift to the world.
Yeah. It's a gift to me. Hopefully more than just me. Well, I have one final tip for navigating the holidays with a broken heart, and Bronwen was doing it just now, is to find that four-legged furry friend of yours and just cozy up really good with them. They're give the best kind of snuggles.
They're good little grief viewers, those babies.
Those babies. Well, friends, we would love to hear from you. What tips, what hacks you have for navigating the holidays with a broken heart? What tools from Reiki you have used to transform your brokenness into openness? We'd love to just share the gratitude that we have for each of you, from our hearts to yours. Just wishing you a beautiful holiday season. May the force of Reiki be with you. May the joy of this season be with you. And maybe we just be present to what is and marvel at the beauty of that as well. So share with us your stories around this topic. We would love to hear. And also, please feel free to just send this episode on to somebody who might be struggling this holiday season. Check in with the people you love and the people who might not be okay this time of year, of course. So thank you all so much for listening. We'll see you again next week.
Yep. Next week. Oh, we have another Christmas one next week, but it's going to be on a more, I don't know. What are we doing? Something more cheerful. This was not too bad.
Part 1 of 2. Part 1 of 2.
Yeah. Part 2.
The other side of it next week.
All right, friends. See you then. Bye.